The courtroom was full that morning. Wooden benches were packed with people whispering quietly. Lawyers in dark suits moved papers on their desks. A judge sat high above everyone, watching the room with calm eyes. The air felt heavy, like something important was about to happen. On one side of the courtroom sat a powerful billionaire businessman. He wore an expensive suit and a confident smile. Two skilled lawyers sat beside him, surrounded by thick files and documents. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed, as if this case was already over. To him, this was just another small problem that money could fix. Across the room, near the witness stand, stood a black woman in a simple dress. Her clothes were clean but old. Her hands held a thin folder, worn at the edges. She looked small compared to the powerful people around her. Some people in the courtroom whispered when they saw her. "That's the maid," someone murmured. "What is she doing here alone?" another asked. The woman's name was Grace. For many years, she had worked as a maid in the billionaire's house. She cleaned his floors, cooked his meals, and stayed quiet. She learned to lower her eyes and keep her voice soft. Today, she stood alone in a courtroom, facing the man who once laughed while she worked silently in his home. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked at Grace. "Do you have a lawyer to represent you?" he asked calmly. Grace took a deep breath. Her heart beat fast, but her voice was steady. "No, Your Honor," she said. "I will represent myself." The room went silent for 1 second. Then, suddenly, a loud laugh broke the silence. The billionaire laughed openly. "You must be joking," he said, shaking his head. "A maid representing herself in court. This is a waste of time." His laughter spread like poison. A few people in the courtroom smiled. Some lawyers exchanged amused looks. Even a clerk tried to hide a grin. Grace stood still, her face calm, but inside, memories rushed through her mind. She remembered waking up before sunrise. She remembered scrubbing floors until her hands hurt. She remembered being ignored, talked down to, and treated as invisible. The billionaire leaned toward his lawyers and whispered loudly enough for others to hear. "She doesn't even understand the law," he said. "This will be over in minutes." Grace heard every word. Her fingers tightened around the folder in her hands. She lowered her eyes for a moment, not in shame, but in control. She had waited years for this day. She would not let laughter stop her. The judge raised his hand. "Order," he said firmly. "This court will show respect to everyone." The billionaire smiled politely, but the arrogance in his eyes did not fade. He believed he was untouchable. Money, power, and reputation had always protected him. Grace slowly stepped forward. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her. Some judged her. Some doubted her. Some felt sorry for her. But none of them knew the truth. She looked at the judge and spoke clearly. "I am here because I was wronged," she said. "And I am here to speak the truth." The billionaire sighed dramatically and rolled his eyes. "Your Honor," he said, standing up, "this woman worked as a maid in my house. She is confused. She is wasting the court's time." Grace felt the sting of his words, but she did not react. She remembered all the nights she cried quietly so no one would hear. She remembered promising herself that one day, she would speak. The judge looked at Grace carefully. "You may continue," he said. Grace nodded. She opened her folder slowly. Inside were papers she had protected for years. Old contracts. Bank records. Notes written by hand. Evidence that could change everything. But the courtroom did not know that yet. The billionaire leaned back in his chair again, smiling confidently. In his mind, this case was already won. He believed the woman standing alone had no power, no voice, and no chance. Grace took one more deep breath. Her voice was calm, but her words carried weight. "I was more than just a maid," she said softly. The billionaire's smile widened. "Sure you were," he muttered. But something in Grace's eyes made the judge lean forward. The laughter in the room slowly faded. A strange tension filled the air. No one realized it yet, but the truth was about to walk out of the shadows. And the man who laughed the loudest was about to face a reality he never expected. The courtroom felt different now. The quiet laughter from earlier had faded, but the air was still heavy with judgment. Grace stood alone at the front, holding her thin folder. The billionaire sat comfortably with his lawyers, his arms crossed, his face full of confidence. To him, this case was nothing more than a short break in his busy life. The judge nodded at Grace. "You may continue," he said. Grace looked down at her papers for a moment. Her hands shook slightly, but she steadied them. When she spoke, her voice was calm, clear, and respectful. "For many years," she began, "I worked in his house. I cleaned. I cooked. I stayed silent." The billionaire smiled and leaned toward his lawyer. "She admits it herself," he whispered loudly. "She was just a maid." Some people in the courtroom nodded. A few smiled again. Grace heard them, but she did not stop. "I worked long hours," she continued. "Sometimes without pay. Sometimes without rest." The billionaire suddenly stood up. "Your Honor," he said sharply, "this is not a place for sad stories. She was paid. She agreed to her job." Grace felt a deep ache in her chest, but she looked straight at the judge. "I was paid very little," she said softly. "And I was promised more." The billionaire laughed again, shaking his head. "She doesn't even understand contracts," he said. "She is confused." Grace closed her eyes for a brief second. She remembered nights when she slept on the floor after working all day. She remembered being told to stay quiet, to know her place. The memories hurt, but they also made her stronger. The judge raised his hand. "Let her speak," he said firmly. Grace nodded in thanks. "I trusted him," she said. "He told me we were building something together." That sentence caused a small stir in the courtroom. A few people looked up. The billionaire's smile did not change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Building what?" he asked with a mocking tone. "A cleaning business." Some people laughed again. Grace's face remained calm, but inside, the pain was deep. She held her folder closer to her chest, like armor. "I helped in ways no one saw," she said. "I worked late nights. I helped organize accounts. I made phone calls. I saved money when the business was small." The billionaire shook his head. "This is nonsense," he said. "She is imagining things." Grace turned to face him fully for the first time. Her voice was still soft, but there was strength in it now. "I am not imagining anything," she said. "I kept records." The billionaire's lawyer leaned forward, interested. The judge leaned forward too. Grace opened her folder and took out a few papers. Her fingers brushed the worn edges. "These papers are old," she said. "But they are real." The billionaire's smile slowly weakened. "Not much. Just enough to notice." "Still," he laughed lightly. "Anyone can bring papers," he said. "This proves nothing." Grace nodded slowly. "Then please allow me to explain," she said. The judge looked at her carefully. "You may proceed," he said. Grace took a deep breath. The room was quiet now. No one was laughing. No one was whispering. Even the billionaire's lawyers were watching closely. "I did not come here to beg," Grace said. "I came here because I deserve to be heard." For the first time, the billionaire felt a small discomfort in his chest. Something about her calm confidence bothered him. She did not look scared anymore. She did not look weak. Grace looked around the courtroom. "I was called just a maid," she said. "But I carried secrets. I carried promises." The judge's face grew serious. "Promises?" he asked. Grace nodded. "Yes," she replied. "And in the next hearing, I will prove them." The billionaire's fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. He did not know why, but a strange feeling settled in his stomach. The laughter that once protected him was gone. Grace closed her folder slowly. "That is all for today," she said quietly. The judge nodded. "Court is adjourned," he announced. As people stood and began to leave, eyes followed Grace. No one laughed now. Some looked confused. Some looked thoughtful. The billionaire stayed seated for a moment longer, his smile completely gone. For the first time, doubt entered his mind. And somewhere deep inside him, fear began to grow. The courtroom was full again the next day. People had returned with curiosity in their eyes. Word had spread about the black maid who stood alone against a billionaire. Some came to watch. Some came to judge. Some came because they felt something important was about to happen. Grace walked in slowly. She wore the same simple dress, but her steps were steady. She was no longer shaking. She had spent the night reading her papers again and again, reminding herself why she was there. She sat quietly, holding her folder close. Across the room, the billionaire entered with his lawyers. He looked calm on the outside, but inside, he felt uneasy. The confidence he had yesterday did not feel as strong today. Still, he lifted his chin and smiled slightly, pretending everything was normal. The judge entered, and the courtroom stood. When everyone sat again, the judge looked at Grace. "You may continue your case," he said. Grace stood up. Her voice was calm, but it carried strength. "I worked in his house when his business was still small," she began. "There were only a few workers. No big office. No fame." The billionaire's lawyer stood quickly. "Objection," he said. "This is irrelevant." The judge raised his hand. "Let her speak," he replied. Grace nodded and continued. "I cleaned the house during the day," she said. "At night, I helped with files and papers. He trusted me then. He asked me to help." The billionaire shifted in his seat. His jaw tightened slightly. Grace took out a paper and held it up. "This is a notebook," she said. "I wrote everything down. Dates. Numbers. Names." The courtroom leaned in. Even people sitting at the back paid attention now. The billionaire laughed softly, but it sounded forced. "She wrote notes," he said. "That means nothing." Grace did not look at him. She turned to the judge. "I saved money," she continued. "I gave it to help start the company. I was promised a share." That sentence hit the room like a stone dropped in water. People whispered. The judge leaned forward. "A share?" he asked. Grace nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. A partnership." The billionaire's lawyer stood again, his voice sharper this time. "This is false," he said. "There is no record of such a thing." Grace opened her folder again. "There is," she replied quietly. She placed a document on the table. It was old, yellow at the edges, but clearly signed. The billionaire froze for a second. His smile disappeared completely. The judge looked at the document carefully. "This signature," he said, "appears to be yours." The billionaire swallowed hard. "It means nothing," he said quickly. "That was years ago. It was informal." Grace spoke again, slowly and clearly. "It was not informal to me. It was my future." The room was silent. No one laughed now. No one whispered. Grace looked at the billionaire for the first time with steady eyes. "I trusted you," she said. "When the company grew, you erased my name." The billionaire stood up suddenly. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "She is trying to steal my success." The judge raised his voice. "Sit down," he said firmly. The billionaire sat, his face tight with anger. Grace continued, her voice steady but full of pain. "I stayed silent because I was afraid," she said. "I was poor. I was black. I was alone." A few people lowered their heads. "But today," she added, "I am no longer silent." She placed more papers on the table. Bank records. Old messages. Proof of money transfers. The judge's face grew serious. "This court will review these documents carefully," he said. The billionaire felt his chest tighten. For the first time in his life, he felt trapped. Grace closed her folder slowly. "That is all for now," she said. The judge nodded. "We will continue tomorrow." As people stood to leave, the courtroom buzzed with quiet shock. Some looked at Grace with respect now. Others looked at the billionaire with doubt. The billionaire remained seated, staring at the papers on the table. His laughter was gone. The silence he once used to control others was now closing in on him. The courtroom was tense the next morning. Everyone was waiting to see what Grace would reveal next. The billionaire sat in his chair, trying to appear calm, but his fingers tapped nervously on the armrest. Something about the documents yesterday had unsettled him. He had thought he could laugh off a maid, but now he was beginning to feel the weight of her words. Grace walked to the front again. She held her folder tightly, her eyes scanning the room. She knew many people were watching, reporters, lawyers, and even strangers. Some were curious. Some were skeptical. But her heart was steady. She had spent years preparing for this moment. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I will show proof that I am not just a maid." She opened her folder slowly and pulled out a stack of papers, contracts, and old company ledgers. She placed them carefully on the table in front of the judge. The judge looked down at the documents, then glanced at the billionaire. "These are official records?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Grace replied. "I have copies of the original agreements. I contributed to the company's early investments, decisions, and growth. My work was erased from the records by the defendant." A murmur ran through the courtroom. People leaned forward, whispering to each other. Even the billionaire's lawyers exchanged nervous glances. The billionaire stood up, trying to maintain control. "Your Honor, this is impossible," he said. "These papers are forged. She is trying to take what is mine." Grace looked at him directly, her voice steady. "They are not forged. They are real. Every signature, every entry can be verified." The room went silent. The weight of her words settled like a heavy fog. The people who had laughed at her yesterday now stared in disbelief. The judge raised his hand for order. "We will review the documents carefully. But, Mr. Anderson," he said, addressing the billionaire, "you should understand that if these papers are genuine, there will be serious consequences." The billionaire's confident smile faltered. His eyes widened slightly, and he shifted in his seat. He could feel the attention of the entire courtroom on him, not admiration, but judgment. Grace took a deep breath. "I trusted him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it echoed in the silent room. "I helped him when the company was nothing. I believed in the dream we shared. And yet, I was treated as if I were invisible." Some people in the courtroom gasped quietly. The billionaire looked around nervously, seeing the shock on faces he thought he controlled. Then Grace leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking on his. "I am no longer invisible," she said. "I am here to claim my rights, my respect, and my truth." For the first time, the billionaire felt fear. Not just embarrassment, but a deep, gnawing fear. He had mocked her. He had laughed. He had believed that nothing could touch him. And now, the tables were turning. The judge nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, we will examine the evidence in detail. Everyone will have a chance to speak. Court is adjourned for today." As the crowd began to stand, whispers filled the air. The story of a simple maid standing against a billionaire had captured everyone's attention. Some spectators quietly took notes. Some looked at the billionaire with newfound doubt. The billionaire stayed seated for a moment, staring at the papers. His laughter, once so loud and confident, had vanished. For the first time, he realized that power was not just in wealth or status. Grace packed her folder carefully, her hands steady. She walked past him calmly, holding her head high. The people in the courtroom watched her, many silently rooting for her. Outside the room, she paused for a moment and whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." And in that moment, the billionaire understood something very important. He had underestimated her, and he was about to face a reckoning he would never forget. The next day, the courtroom was buzzing with anticipation. Reporters whispered to each other, and spectators shifted in their seats. Everyone remembered the powerful image of Grace, a maid, standing alone against a billionaire just days ago. Now, the air was thick with tension. People were waiting for the truth. Grace walked to the front of the courtroom, her folder in hand. She was calm, poised, and her steps were deliberate. The billionaire sat in his chair, trying to look confident, but he could feel the eyes of the crowd judging him. Something told him this day would be different. She placed her folder on the table carefully and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "I will now reveal my true role in this company." The billionaire chuckled, nervously at first, then louder, trying to cover his growing anxiety. "Here we go again," he muttered under his breath. "A maid pretending to be important." Grace ignored him. "I am not just a maid," she said clearly, holding her papers for everyone to see. "I was a co-founder of this company. I helped start it, grow it, and manage it in its earliest days." A gasp ran through the courtroom. People leaned forward in their seats. Some mouths hung open. The billionaire froze, his confident smile completely gone. He could feel the weight of the words settle on him like a heavy stone. "Co-founder?" the judge asked, raising an eyebrow. "Can you provide proof?" Grace nodded calmly. "Yes, Your Honor. These documents show my contributions, my investments, and my role in every decision during the company's early years. He tried to erase my name and claim full credit, but the truth cannot be hidden." She opened a folder and placed several official documents on the table, contracts, signed letters, and bank records. Every signature matched her name. Every record showed her involvement. The courtroom erupted in whispers. People looked at the billionaire in shock. Some shook their heads. Some held their hands over their mouths. The power he once held in the room had vanished in an instant. The billionaire tried to speak, his voice shaky. This is impossible," he stammered. "These papers, they don't change anything." Grace looked at him calmly, her eyes steady. "They change everything," she said. "You laughed at me, mocked me, and called me nothing. But the truth is, I helped build everything you have today." The judge leaned forward, studying the documents carefully. "These records are authentic," he said. "Mr. Anderson, it seems you have removed the rightful co-founder from your company." The billionaire's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had always controlled situations with wealth, power, and fear. But here, none of that mattered. He was powerless. Grace turned to the courtroom, her voice strong and unwavering. "I am here to reclaim what is mine, to demand respect, and to show that courage and honesty can never be erased." People began to murmur approval. Some whispered, "She is brave." Others said, "Finally, justice." The billionaire looked around, seeing the disbelief and judgment in every eye. He realized the world had changed in a matter of moments. Grace closed her folder slowly. She had made her point. The judge nodded. "We will review the evidence thoroughly. Court will reconvene tomorrow for the final decision." As the crowd stood to leave, many turned to look at Grace with admiration. The billionaire stayed seated, staring at the papers on the table, his mind racing. He had laughed at her, humiliated her, and believed she had no power. Now, everything was reversed. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered to each other, and people shared the story on their phones. Grace walked calmly, holding her head high. She had revealed the truth. The billionaire had no answer. And for the first time, justice was within reach. And somewhere deep in the room, a lesson had been learned: arrogance and wealth cannot overpower truth, courage, or determination. The next day, the courtroom was buzzing with anticipation. Reporters whispered to each other, and spectators shifted in their seats. Everyone remembered the powerful image of Grace, a maid, standing alone against a billionaire just days ago. Now, the air was thick with tension. People were waiting for the truth. Grace walked to the front of the courtroom, her folder in hand. She was calm, poised, and her steps were deliberate. The billionaire sat in his chair, trying to look confident, but he could feel the eyes of the crowd judging him. Something told him this day would be different. She placed her folder on the table carefully and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "I will now reveal my true role in this company." The billionaire chuckled, nervously at first, then louder, trying to cover his growing anxiety. "Here we go again," he muttered under his breath. "A maid pretending to be important." Grace ignored him. "I am not just a maid," she said clearly, holding her papers for everyone to see. "I was a co-founder of this company. I helped start it, grow it, and manage it in its earliest days." A gasp ran through the courtroom. People leaned forward in their seats. Some mouths hung open. The billionaire froze, his confident smile completely gone. He could feel the weight of the words settle on him like a heavy stone. "Co-founder?" the judge asked, raising an eyebrow. "Can you provide proof?" Grace nodded calmly. "Yes, Your Honor. These documents show my contributions, my investments, and my role in every decision during the company's early years. He tried to erase my name and claim full credit, but the truth cannot be hidden." She opened a folder and placed several official documents on the table: contracts, signed letters, and bank records. Every signature matched her name. Every record showed her involvement. The courtroom erupted in whispers. People looked at the billionaire in shock. Some shook their heads. Some held their hands over their mouths. The power he once held in the room had vanished in an instant. The billionaire tried to speak, his voice shaky. This is impossible," he stammered. "These papers, they don't change anything." Grace looked at him calmly, her eyes steady. "They change everything," she said. "You laughed at me, mocked me, and called me nothing. But the truth is, I helped build everything you have today." The judge leaned forward, studying the documents carefully. "These records are authentic," he said. "Mr. Anderson, it seems you have removed the rightful co-founder from your company." The billionaire's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had always controlled situations with wealth, power, and fear. But here, none of that mattered. He was powerless. Grace turned to the courtroom, her voice strong and unwavering. "I am here to reclaim what is mine, to demand respect, and to show that courage and honesty can never be erased." People began to murmur approval. Some whispered, "She is brave." Others said, "Finally, justice." The billionaire looked around, seeing the disbelief and judgment in every eye. He realized the world had changed in a matter of moments. Grace closed her folder slowly. She had made her point. The judge nodded. "We will review the evidence thoroughly. Court will reconvene tomorrow for the final decision." As the crowd stood to leave, many turned to look at Grace with admiration. The billionaire stayed seated, staring at the papers on the table, his mind racing. He had laughed at her, humiliated her, and believed she had no power. Now, everything was reversed. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered to each other, and people shared the story on their phones. Grace walked calmly, holding her head high. She had revealed the truth. The billionaire had no answer. And for the first time, justice was within reach. And somewhere deep in the room, a lesson had been learned. Arrogance and wealth cannot overpower truth, courage, or determination. The courtroom was quiet, but the weight of the day hung in the air. Grace walked out calmly, holding her folder close. People around her whispered and stared in admiration. Reporters crowded the doors, cameras flashing, but she moved steadily, confident and proud. She had won more than a case. She had won justice, respect, and her rightful place. The billionaire followed behind, his head lowered. He had lost not only in court but also in pride. His arrogance had been crushed by truth. He looked around at the crowd, now judging him, and for the first time, he felt small, powerless, and exposed. Outside, the sun shone warmly. Grace took a deep breath of fresh air, smiling softly. She looked at the people who had supported her silently, some nodding, some taking notes. She whispered to herself, "Truth cannot be hidden. Courage always matters." She thought of all the years she had spent as a maid, invisible and underestimated. All the long nights, the hard work, the silence, everything had led to this moment. Now, she was no longer invisible. She was recognized, respected, and strong. The young children who had helped her, Iron and others, ran to her side. She knelt down, holding them close. "See," she whispered, "being brave and speaking the truth changes everything." Their faces lit up with hope and admiration. The billionaire left quietly, humbled, realizing that money and power cannot replace respect and honesty. The courtroom doors closed behind him, and the day's story spread quickly. Everyone who witnessed it remembered the lesson: never underestimate anyone, and never ignore the truth. Grace looked at the city skyline beyond the courthouse. She knew life would not be easy, but she had proven something important. Courage and honesty could overcome fear, mockery, and injustice. She turned to leave with her young companions, a gentle smile on her face. "This is only the beginning," she said softly. "The world will learn to respect the truth, one step at a time." And with that, Grace walked into her new life, not as a maid, not as someone underestimated, but as a woman who had faced the impossible and emerged victorious.